right, let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for this day. Pray that you bless our time together today as we talk about some of the events going on in the world and how they relate to Bible prophecy. Bless us today in Jesus' name, amen. Well, so today I'm going to recycle my all-time favorite graphic that I did about that canary. As you know, there's in mining days, they used to carry a canary down into the coal mine, and if the canary died, a canary would die before them because of any gases like carbon monoxide that were present in the mine, and they knew to get out of there. So we have the canary. It's kind of on life support now, trying to keep it alive as we get closer and closer to the end. Don't read too much into it. You can see the IV with the goldfish in it there, and goldfish crackers there for the canary. So we're going to spend a lot of time on this. Anyway, so these are some of the different platforms that we're on. You can sign onto those, and I'm still working on getting a podcast up for just the audio, so it'll help some people who have bandwidth issues. And once we get that, we'll put those in the show. I hate to use the show, but the video links on YouTube or Rumble will show you where you can go to get the audio. And I'm going to try to start listing some of the important articles that I look at each week, but sometimes I sit there and I'll look and I'll have 40, 50, 60 tabs open on my browser with articles, and going back and finding the ones that I actually had time to read and analyze gets a little bit difficult. So I'll try to do that, but my staff just doesn't work all the time, meaning a staff of one, me, and a wife who lets me do it. So we talk each week about the convergence of events, and there really are a lot of things. There are these different lines of Bible prophecy, and they all seem to be happening with different rapidity. This is a graphic I did a lot of years ago with some of the different things that I think that are important markers in Bible prophecy, starting back at creation, Tower of Babel, Noah's Ark, the patriarchs. That's the tomb of the patriarchs in Hebron, the development of Jerusalem, the kingdom of Israel, Judah, the split, the exile of the Jewish people, and then we have these events that we know are going to happen as we get closer to the end. And you're going to see the foundations of those laid, and things are going to happen really, really quickly, and they seem to be happening with some rapidity. So this is the grid that I've kind of developed, that I look at the prophecy ACLU, acceleration. Things are going to be happening very, very quickly. And I think that's pretty easy to see in today's world. Things do happen very quickly. Sometimes, I'll sit down and I'll look at an article and I'll think about it, and that'll be on Monday or Tuesday, and then I get to Sunday morning and it's like, I'll see this article and it's like, that happened like a month ago, right? It's like, no, it happened 4 days ago. They were writing about that. It's just because there's so much that happens in between, and there'll be a convergence. Everything will be happening at the same time. They're all going to be converging at that sort of ultimate event, the second coming of Christ. And so, but as they get closer, it's almost like the vortex of a tornado. And if you've ever seen one up close, you know that it can be very turbulent inside a tornado. And that's what it'll be like. It'll be almost like a vortex as everything converges. And then there's logistics. There are things that have to happen for prophecy to be fulfilled. For example, one of the views of Babylon, it's a view I don't dismiss, but I don't know that it's a view that I would say is the way it's going to happen, is that Babylon needs to be rebuilt in Iraq, where Babylon was, to be this great city that controls the commercial life of the planet. Well, if that's going to happen, then there's a logistical aspect to that. Rome wasn't built in a day, and Babylon won't be rebuilt in a day. So that has an impact on how we view things and the timing of things. And then again, as we get closer to the end, we'll have as Daniel chapter 11 and 12 say, that many shall be purified, made white, sealed up the books until the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand. They won't really understand what's going on. Let me just ask you a question. When you look at the world today, does it appear that there are a lot of people that don't really understand what's going on? I mean, I feel like I live on a different planet from some people. I'll start off with one of those examples. But then it says, the wise shall understand. And this great passage that I read last week, Psalm 11, that I'll just do again, in the Lord put I my trust. How say ye to my soul, flee as a bird to your mountain? For lo, the wicked bend their bow, and they make ready their arrow upon the string, that they may privily shoot at the upright in heart. Are people taking shots at believers these days? It seems like everywhere you turn they are. Now, I'm not saying that we're in the midst of persecution like the first century church. At least here in America, there are places in the world where certainly that's going on. But then in verse 3 it says, if the right foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? And then it answers the question, the Lord is in his holy temple. In other words, God's in control as we see all of these things going on that we don't like. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold, his eyelids try the children of men. The Lord trieth the righteous, but the wicked in him that loveth violence, his soul hateth. Upon the wicked he shall rain snares, fire and brimstone, and a horrible tempest. This shall be the portion of their cup. For the righteous Lord loveth righteousness. His countenance doth behold the upright. And so the answer to the question there is, what do we do if the foundations are destroyed? And the answer is God is in control, and God has this, and he has you. So let's look at some of the things that happen on a daily basis. Now, there's a school, I don't have a lot of graphics on it. There's a school out in Salinas, California, that's essentially, they're teaching critical race theory. And I think it was one of the teachers there said, my kids don't understand it. They hate learning about it. So the school system out there said, well, we don't teach critical race theory. But then somebody went to the website where the teacher lesson plans are, the sample lesson plans, and they showed this one, critical race theory, it says. And so whenever they say that, so you'll see the head of the American Federation of Teachers or the National Education Association, they'll get up there and say, I don't know what you're talking about. We don't teach critical race theory. Really? And then you go and look, and they have these things in there, and they teach something that comes from critical race theory, and they're implementing critical race theory, and that's the problem, because they're teaching kids to be racist. So when they say, well, I don't know what you're talking about, or when these lunatics on MSNBC go, there's no such thing taught in schools as critical race theory, they're gaslighting you. In other words, they're trying to make you think that what you see isn't really what you're seeing. And this is fairly common throughout the world right now. Now, there's been some developments. I'll talk about one country in a moment. If you could zoom that out. The Meta has unveiled a supercomputer. Now Meta didn't have a very good week. That's Facebook. They had one day where their market value declined almost $250 billion in one day. That's worth than almost all the other companies on the planet are worth. They went down that much in a day. It's Mark Zuckerberg personally lost $31 billion in personal net worth this week. Now, let's be honest. It's probably not going to have an impact on his lifestyle. So if let's say he was worth $100 billion before this started, and now he's worth $69 billion. I mean, do you really think that he's like, well, I'm not going to buy that $150 million house that I was looking at or something like it doesn't, or, I guess I'm going to buy 40 Teslas instead of, 50. I mean, it doesn't really impact his lifestyle, but it does show that things are very volatile in the world. On the other flip side of that, Amazon went up, I don't know exactly the exact numbers, but almost as much as Facebook went down, and a day or two later. So this is a volatile world that we live in. And from economic, and I don't have a lot to say about economics today, there are going to be supply chain issues. The supply of gas and that sort of thing, and petroleum, which are important in the making of fertilizer, has been disrupted. And everywhere that I've read in agricultural circles, they're telling people you need to be prepared for a shortage of fertilizer. Well, what impact does that have? Well, if there's a shortage of fertilizer, they don't get the crop yields that they get. Crop yields have increased dramatically. I know that growing up in Ohio, we always had corn, a lot of corn being grown, and now it looks like little trees out there some summers when they get the right amount of rain. And so the corn yields have gone way up. But so the corn yields are down. Well, then what does that affect? Well, that affects livestock feed. That affects meat, lack of meat, supply and demand, price of, anybody go and check the price of meat lately? It's gone up. I saw prime steaks the other day at Costco for $28 a pound. So the hamburger at $4 a pound looks pretty attractive in that context. So Meta, they're building these supercomputers. I saw an article in the Financial Times the other day that Google has announced that they have now had a computer write software on its own, think through a problem and write software on its own. So we'll talk more about this transhumanism, artificial intelligence in the future. By the way, next Sunday, first hour, Brandon Holthouse. Is it next Sunday? 2 weeks. What is this? This is 6th, right? I think it's in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, Brandon Holthouse will be here. He'll speak first hour, and then second hour, he and I will do a joint update. He's from Rock Harbor Church in Bakersfield, and he does prophecy updates all the time, and a great young preacher. So he'll be here, and then I think the last Sunday in the month, I'll be doing first and second hour. So let's talk just a little bit about Charlie Vector. I don't have too much about it. Of course, this virus seems to be, the narrative seems to be changing in many places. And it's a patchwork of things you can't figure out. And it seems like it's hard to figure out what's going on because they want to keep you off balance. It almost seems that that's what they're doing. So, for example, Youngkin was elected governor of Virginia. He came in and said, I'm stopping all mask mandates in school. So what happened? In 7 school districts in Virginia sued him and said, you can't do that as a governor. Even though the governors have been going around saying, you have to do this, you have to have mask mandates and that type of thing. Now the governor can't do it. He can't. So the governor can't say, you don't have to do this. And the courts went along with him. They lost the court case. And in Loudoun County, Virginia, which is sort of the gold medal example of lunatics in charge of the asylum, I've seen video of them that the kids come to school without a mask and they are sent home and expelled and prohibited from attending school. I was talking to a friend who has a relative who goes to Baylor University, ostensibly a Baptist school. They got away from that a long time ago. But the tuition cost of Baylor, if you're not getting a scholarship or anything, is $70,000 a year. Well, they have a pretty strict rule in place that if you test positive for coronavirus, you have to stay in your dorm and you cannot go to class. You may not even be able to attend class virtually because the professors get to decide whether they will conduct a virtual class or not. Well, if they don't go to class and there's no virtual option, they get an absence. And if you get 3 absences in a class, you fail the class. So you're paying $70,000, you're stuck in the dorm where you may or may not get fed on a regular basis, and you get an F in the class. To me, that sounds like a class action waiting to happen. Up in Canada, of course, they've had this trucker protest, the Freedom Convoy or whatever they're calling it in Ottawa, but now it's spread to other cities. It's been interesting. I was reading a lot of Canadian newspapers, and there's sort of no middle ground. They're either for the convoy and what the truckers are standing up for, or they think the truckers are a bunch of insurrectionists that want to tear down Canada. So they block streets in Ottawa. They're on their way they're coming into Toronto and other cities. Then there's this, you can't find out how many people are involved because the mainstream media just doesn't want to cover it. They're acting like it's a couple hundred guys that are doing this. But here's headlines. They're saying, well, we'll leave Ottawa when the Prime Minister does what's right. The Prime Minister, who has received all of the state-approved treatments for Charlie Vector 019er, tested positive for Charlie Vector 019er, and is left Ottawa, and somebody said he's gone all the way to British Columbia to isolate. Tremendous display of, he'll never be in an update of the profiles in Courage, that's for sure. I saw some ladies interviewed on the street in Ottawa, and they're saying, it's just terrible. These people, these truckers have come here, and they're all masked, by the way, so you can hardly understand what they're saying. But they all go, they're interfering with our freedom to move about the city. And it's like, that's the whole point, madam. 1, 2, and 3, that's the point. So there's, now that I hear there's truckers in the United States doing it, and of course some of the columnists, I think in the Toronto Sun, I read an article, and the columnist, she was just saying, these are horrible people. They don't care about anybody. They're selfish. We follow the science, and so what's happened is it's just created tremendous vision. So I played you some clips of Trudeau over the past couple weeks where he said that the people who won't get the state-approved treatment and who are on the right politically, they're misogynist and racist. He's got to get all the invective words in there, inject them into the conversation. So this week he was asked a question about, are you going to go meet with the truckers? That would be, by the way, you can find plenty of examples of Trudeau in the past when there are demonstrations going on in a foreign country. He's come out and said many times, it would be great if the leader of the country would just meet with those who are protesting. And so now he has people protesting in his country, and he's out of there. He's wherever he just can't be reached. So here's a response. You'll hear a little bit of the question at first. The volume's kind of low. And then he answers the question, are you going to meet with the truckers? Listen to this.
A reason that you can give as for why you will not discuss or have any negotiations with this particular group?
I have attended protests and rallies in the past. when I agreed with the goals, when I supported the people expressing their concerns and their issues. Black Lives Matter is an excellent example of that. But I have also chosen to not go anywhere near protests that have expressed hateful rhetoric, violence towards fellow citizens, and a disrespect not just of science, but of the frontline health workers and, quite frankly, the 90% of truckers who have been doing the right thing to keep Canadians safe, to put food on our tables.
Okay. Now, so he's saying the state-approved treatment is mandated for truckers. What did he say? Oh, this was early on in this dealing with Charlie Vector 019er. Here's what he said in an interview.
What do you do with someone who's immunocompromised, or someone who, for religious or deep convictions, decides that no, they're not going to get a vaccine? We're not a country. What do you do? Well, we're not a country that makes vaccination mandatory, for example, but we want to encourage everyone to get it.
Okay, so we're not one that makes it mandatory. Well, we used to be that kind of country. I think OSHA has withdrawn their mandate that they went to court on. So now I'm going to focus mostly on the Middle East and some of the geopolitics going on, Russia and Ukraine. And I hope that you can see, or I can make it seem like all of this is interconnected. And a lot of it does revolve around Israel. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the East Med pipeline and the gas fields that were discovered a number of years ago off the coast of Israel, because that plays into a number of different lines of Bible prophecy. And I'll talk about Russia, Ukraine. I'll talk about Iran, some of the things going on there, and China, Russia, and the Freedom Olympics in China, where all the athletes are now pretty much in quarantine and can't talk to anybody. So let's talk about the East Med pipeline. So a few weeks ago, I'll give you some historical background, and then I have about 2 5 or 6 minute videos, some of which have some quotations, some talking in them. I'll talk over the rest because I think you can it'll help you get an understanding of what's going on in the Eastern Mediterranean and the interrelationship between Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Turkey, Russia. It's all in Europe. It's all interrelated in my view. So a few weeks ago, the U.S. came out, and this would have been January 10th in Athens, the embassy in Athens, came out with a statement and said, look, they're talking about this East Med pipeline. We don't agree with it anymore. We used to support that. It was not supported by the Obama 1 and Obama 2 administrations, and now the Obama 3 administration is not supporting it. Trump and Pompeo did support the East Med pipeline. I'll tell you what the East Med pipeline is. And there's this interview with a guy named Hochstein that appeared in in a Greek newspaper. He's an energy advisor. He was an energy advisor in the first 2 Obama administrations, and now he's come back as an energy advisor. He was interviewed in these Greek newspapers, and the title of the article is kind of interesting. It says, article there on the right, it's in Greek, as you can see, and it's talking about this East Med pipeline. So what the East Med pipeline, and I'll show you some maps in a moment. Well, I can show you a map right now. The East Med pipeline okay, somebody didn't move that slide. My assistant failed to move the slide to the proper place in the presentation. Here we go. So Israel is there in the lower center, and off the coast of Israel, they have discovered gas, a massive amount of gas. It's called the Leviathan Field. So now the question is, okay, what do we do with the gas? Because Israel, I believe, announced early on that we have enough gas for about 500 or 600 years if we just use the gas from that field. Well, that's a pretty significant find. And it also changes the dynamic because they can use the gas to power desalination plants, which help with the water situation in Israel, which, like most of the Middle East, can use water. But then there's also the opportunity, well, why don't we sell the gas? Well, Israel is a little bit isolated. We know that geopolitically and we'll talk about this as we go through the talk today, that Europe is very much dependent on gas from Russia. Well, now there is this dispute over Russia and Ukraine. Russia has cut back, in some cases, reversed the gas flow. About a third of Russian gas that goes to Europe goes through pipelines in Ukraine. So Ukraine gets money from that. So they don't want to shut down the pipelines, and Europe doesn't want them to shut down the pipelines because, I mean, my friends in California don't really understand this, and Florida people that used to live up here have forgotten it in many cases, that it gets cold here in the winter. It's been very cold the last week. So you need gas to heat homes. Well, the gas prices are up somewhere 300, 400, 450% in Europe right now. And so it's costing people a lot of money to heat their homes. I don't know if they do like our government does. When something's going up in price, they exclude it from the inflation calculations so they can skew the numbers a bit. So one of the proposals has been to build this pipeline from Israel up to Cyprus, from Cyprus over to Crete, from Crete up across to Greece, across Greece to Italy, and then connect to other pipelines into Europe. It would be an incredibly expensive project. Estimates range from $6 to $10 billion, and experts are saying we don't even think they can do it for that. The length of time that it would be required to do that would be 6 to 10 years. I mean, it's a massive project because in that pipeline between Cyprus and Crete, the pipe would have to be laid at 9,000 on the floor of the ocean, which is 9,000 feet deep in some places. Well, that puts that much water puts a lot of pressure on the pipeline, so you have to construct it extra heavy duty. It would be easily the largest, longest, most expensive pipeline project in human history because of the engineering, the cost, the time. It would be, and I think it can be done. I think it's feasible. The question is, do the economics make sense? Because once you invest that much, then you got to make sure you sell enough gas to pay back the cost. And you'll see that there's some other pressures that I think, so everybody's wondering, where do we go when we get rid of this narrative that's controlling Charlie Vector 019er? Because they seem to be backing off that. So certainly everything's going to go back to normal and they're going to let us alone, right? How many believe that? Well, if you believe that, I have a pipeline to sell you. So it would be a massive project. So what happened was when Israel entered into an alliance, and you'll see this in the video in a moment. Israel entered into an alliance on the pipeline with Greece and some other companies. Now it's interesting. So Hochstein, who's this U.S. guy, is cited in some articles in the Greek newspapers that the United States no longer supports this pipeline. Well, this has geopolitical ramifications all over the place because Israel was really counting on it. Even in terms of Bible prophecy, some of us look at Bible prophecy and we look at this northern alliance that comes down against Israel in the latter days, Ezekiel 38 and 39, and it says, I will put hooks in your jaw and pull you back in. So it almost appears that this is a country leader of this coalition has been in the Middle East, but they've kind of withdrawn from the Middle East or left or been forced to leave. But then it says, I'll set a hook in your jaw and I'll drag you back in. So there's a lot of speculation, like what does that really mean? And one of the thinking was a lot of people, and I think I may even said it, maybe this gas discovery in the Eastern Mediterranean will be the hook in the jaw. Because, Russia, maybe Russia or Turkey or somebody will be running out of gas someday, and they'll need to get other gas supplies. Now, you might think after today that it has nothing to do with anything, but I think it does have a lot to do with things Bible prophetically, even if the project doesn't go. But it's interesting. Here's the title of the article in this Greek newspaper. And it's titled, 7 Questions for the East Med Pipeline. Who wins and who loses if the pipeline construction is called off? And here's some questions. What is the pipeline that the U.S. characterized as a hotbed of tension? What is the pipeline that the U.S. characterized as a hotbed of tension in the Eastern Mediterranean? And then there are a number of other questions like, is it feasible? Is the cost done? But then another article is titled, The East Med Gas Pipeline and the U.S. Stop, and it talks about the fact that this changes the chessboard of geopolitics in the Middle East. That's the word that they use in these articles. So Greece doesn't like it because they were in alliance with Israel. So you had Cyprus, Greece, and Italy, and they'd all signed off on this pipeline. They had actually formed a confederation. They did include Turkey, though. But as you can see from the pipeline, whoops, that's not the pipeline. Oh, it's way back in my presentation. Turkey's not anywhere near really the pipeline, except that when you look at so there's the Leviathan field, and understand too that this is a big point of contention between Israel and Lebanon. In fact, this week they will be having negotiations over where do we have the line of demarcation of the field. I mean, how do we draw that line out from the coastline? Israel says it goes straight sort of up at an angle. Lebanon says it should go out. And so as a result of that, because of the dispute, the gas exploration and drilling really hasn't started in part of that field because, of course, Lebanon says it's ours. And it's affecting the Lebanon economy because Lebanon can't get the money, and Lebanon desperately needs money. The other thing, too, is the pipeline will go to Cyprus. Well, Cyprus is split between Turkey and Cyprus. Turkey took over part of Cyprus decades ago, and they won't give it back. So that's why you see on the Cyprus island there, it's GCA, and then you have TRNC, which is the Turkish-controlled part of Cyprus. It's because they control part of Cyprus, Turkey says, well, we're entitled to all the property. So there was a Turkish academic who wrote a thing in Turkey Scope last year, and I've talked about this. So Turkey says, well, we should just have like a joint area economic zone between us and Israel, and you can see the coast of Israel to the coast of Turkey, and we should develop things jointly in that area. And why is that? Well, because there's not much gas around the coast of Turkey, so Turkey's looking for ways to either get money from the pipeline or to participate in the gas. And this is Erdogan. He's like, when I see geopolitics in China, I think of the movie Independence Day, where these the aliens were coming to Earth because they were just like these locusts that came and devoured everything. They were looking for more food and places to take over and pillage. And Turkey's kind of like that. Turkey doesn't have a lot of gas resources. So they talk about this economic development zone. And then what Turkey did to block it was they entered into an agreement with one of the factions in Turkey and Libya and said, well, we're going to develop a economic zone. It's called an EEZ, exclusive economic zone, for Turkey and Libya. And they entered into an agreement with a faction in Libya that didn't even control that part of Libya because they're having a civil war in Libya. And so then Turkey says, well, we have the exclusive rights. We project our power across this zone. You can't put your pipeline here. Unless, of course, you pay us a transit fee. So so here are some of the fields. Here's a picture when they're putting the alliance together. Greece, Cyprus, Israel, and then Mike Pompeo is there. Here's another graphic of what the pipeline would look like. And Turkey doesn't like it, as you'll see in a moment. So they have this, they're trying this blocking thing. So here's a video that was on Turkish television, and it's really pretty well done. These are some of the gas fields that have been discovered. And what you'll see in this video is they interviewed this Hochstein guy. So they get this thing to come out from the State Department, and almost immediately, here comes Turkey with a propaganda video. It's it's incredibly well. I love these graphics. And so this is where Egypt has a gas field. And you can see off the coast of Cyprus, they have these gas fields. And then one of the ways to get these to market would be liquefied natural gas. They have liquefaction. They convert the gas to this, to liquid, and put it in a boat.
But in order to further market its gas reserves and diversify its exports away from Egypt's LNG model, Israel decided to promote a controversial project, the East Med pipeline.
This idea really started at the end of 2015
This is
and
Hochstein.
2016, and discussions between the Israelis and the Cypriots in the group. Now you have to think about the mindset of 2015, 2016. We were in the height of the battles in Europe over access to gas.
And so the State Department under Hillary Clinton and subsequently John Kerry, they got involved in this. And they were sort of supporting it. Of course, one of the big point people in the Obama administration was a guy named Biden to meet with these people and give sort of lip service, yeah, I support this project. So again, the project is incredibly expensive.
To the country's economy. This is a pipeline will start somewhere in the Eastern Mediterranean, maybe in the Israeli fields, Leviathan being the biggest, and then go to Cyprus. And then from Cyprus, it goes west to Crete. That's pretty long. Then it goes north to Greece. And then from Greece, the discussion was it will go to Italy. The problem with this is mostly economic and technological.
And like I said, it would cost somewhere around $6 to $10 billion. Optimistic estimates are that it's 5 years. So understand, 3,000 meters deep, that's pretty deep ocean.
Subsea pipeline in the world. Any endeavor like this is on a massive scale. The price tag is around $7 billion now, could be as high as $10 billion. And the construction of it could take maybe even a decade if you look at other past pipelines in terms of delays, permitting.
The pipeline is also entrenching geopolitical fault lines by leaving Turkey, the country with one of the longest coastlines in the region, backed into a corner.
Now, okay, this is a Turkish television, TRT World, production, so they're pro-Turkish government. And it's interesting, the graphics that they use, because you may have heard me talk about Turkey's blue water doctrine. And you see how they made that sort of a bluish area around Turkey? So the blue water doctrine means that Turkey considers the blue water, the light blue water there, part of Turkey, because they want to be able to control the resources coming out of the East Med. So they do that by extending their coastline out and their continental shelf. This is not really recognized well in international maritime law, but it shows you one thing. When we talk about Ezekiel 38 and 39, it talks about Togarmah and Meshach and Tubal, and there's no question that that's Turkey. So Turkey plays a pivotal central role in the end times and is now in the control of an Islamist, a jihadist. Erdogan has been in control now in Turkey for about 20 years. He'll be 68 in a couple weeks. He's 2 days younger than I am. Doesn't mean anything. It's just how I remember how old he is. By the way, he tested positive for COVID just yesterday or the day before. Says he's doing well. But there's always questions about when you're somebody who's like Erdogan is and the way he runs the country, he gets a cold and the country catches pneumonia. That's sort of the way that goes. So he's not well, and there's been some questions about his health recently. And Turkey has a tremendous amount, a couple thousand miles of coastline, and then you add in the islands, and there's disputed islands between Turkey and Greece. There always have been. But it's geopolitically important because, again, it's talked about in Bible prophecy. It's one of the major players. It has the largest it's part of NATO. It has the largest military force in NATO outside of the United States. It's a country of 80, 85 million. It's as large as Iran. Israel's very strategically located between the three continents of Asia, Africa, and then on to Europe. Turkey is as well. So they have these pipelines that cross Turkey. You'll see that in just a moment. So Turkey's very important, and then, this crazy thing.
The problem with this,
You would need the Turkey's assistance.
President Erdogan.
Mention maritime routes.
With one of the lowest
Okay.
coastlines in the region backed into a corner.
You know, Turkey does claim the longest coast, largest EEZ in the Eastern Med, especially when you consider its close relationship with Northern Cyprus. So, in my opinion, one of the reasons why I would bet against the East Med pipeline being completed is because Turkey is not included. And I think that for a successful pipeline project, you would need the support of Turkey, financial support, logistics support, not to mention maritime routes. It would be near impossible to complete a project of this size and this scale without Turkey's assistance.
President Erdogan saying there could be
But Turkey controls the Bosphorus, the Dardanelles, and that passage between Asia Minor and Europe.
to go from Egypt, Israel, possibly to Cyprus, and then turn right and go to Turkey, and then connect to a number of gas pipelines that Turkey already has. That makes more sense economically and technologically.
You can have a pipeline from Israel. It's much easier and cheaper to go through Cyprus to Turkey, and Turkey's already interconnected with Europe. It is interconnected with all its neighbors. So makes sense to have a hub there.
With its strategic position, Turkey bridges the gap between the western and the eastern countries and is a connection point between the supply and the demand of natural gas.
As long as I was the special envoy of the Obama administration, we had an open dialogue with Turkey. From dialogue with President Erdogan, and at the time, Berat Albayrak was the Minister of Energy. Energy was in many of the conversations between Vice President Biden and President Erdogan, with Secretary Kerry, etc. And we had an open dialogue about this issue on a regular basis at all levels.
And so now the question is, are they going to go through and build this pipeline? or are they going to go straight up to Turkey and connect to pipelines that are up there? And Turkey wants that. Of course, they'll get transit fees for that gas. But Turkey controls this area, the Bosporus and the Dardanelles. They actually just built a big bridge over the Dardanelles. They control this part of northern Cyprus, which in some parts it's been uninhabited for 40 years. And Turkey has this blue water doctrine that one of their military guys very close to Erdogan developed that says, well, it's not just the land of Turkey, it's the blue water around Turkey that's part of Turkey. So there's a lot of dispute in this area. Now I'm going to play another clip and show you the interesting graphics at the beginning of this clip as to how this is supposed to go. Look at this. So they took off, and they actually have the chess pieces and that sort of thing in the beginning of this. So this is like the chessboard of geopolitics. And I would say it's kind of a chessboard of end times prophecy. And it relates around to this area, around Israel and Turkey's relationship. Turkey wants to be in on this. And then look at this graphic of Erdogan's palace in Ankara, this 900-room palace that he built. Oh wait, that was the Israeli parliament building, wasn't it? Anyway, so you see the very good graphics, very well done. But this is sort of playing into politics because you have the pipeline issue with Turkey, you have the pipeline issue with Ukraine. Russia has their really only warm water seaport that in Sevastopol, which they took over on the Crimean Peninsula back in 2014. And to get in and out of there, they got to go through that narrow Bosporus that's controlled by Erdogan. So that's why Erdogan plays everybody like a fiddle. So there's a lot of questions as to whether this thing is going to happen. But mind you that this has elevated the importance of Turkey. That's something that we've been talking about in Bible prophecy for years. I've told you the story. I was at dinner once with Chuck Missler, and I said, Chuck, this is probably back late 2008 or 9, maybe even before. I said, do you get excited about all of this? And he goes, well, I would watch Turkey. When you see Turkey rise to prominence, then you can understand that a lot of things are happening in Bible prophecy. So here, Italy says, well, we supported it, we signed on to it, but we're not so sure that we support this thing anymore. Here's an interview with this guy who's a geopolitics scholar. It would work if Turkey was in it. And you can see how this is a Turkish propaganda piece. So here's the economic zone between Turkey and Libya. And again, the agreement was signed with the faction that doesn't even control that.
This idea was in 2016. No movement has been done except for signing some contracts and MOUs and signing maps and big hoopla of politics and politicians signing all kinds of things. But feasibility study that was promised is not yet complete. The EU hasn't actually endorsed this project, even though some ministers in the region talk about EU as supporting the project. They've agreed to do a feasibility study. That's a big difference. But what's important is for none of them was this really economic and commercial and corporate. It was being driven by politics. When you're doing multi-billion-dollar commercial deals, they should be driven by the commercial side, not by the politics. The politics should support it, but they shouldn't drive.
Still, somebody from the private sector, some big company should invest here between $5 and $6 billion in order to build this project, and I hope that it will take place soon.
An estimated $7 billion.
When they talk about this cost of $6 billion, which is a number that I don't believe,
One of the big issues I think.
not only is it going to be more expensive because this is a complicated project, but the cost of finance for fossil fuel projects is really high. And it's going to go up. That's the penalty of fossil fuels now. You have to add a financial penalty because banks are not going to finance it
Will gas prices
in the same way that they used to.
drop?
And international financial
So you understand what he's saying is now with the push for green energy, non-fossil fuels, this project is even going to be harder to finance because we just don't finance this stuff anymore.
going to be more expensive because this is a complicated project. But the cost of finance for fossil fuel projects is really high. And it's going to go up. That's the penalty of fossil fuels now. You have to add a financial penalty because banks are not going to finance it
Will gas prices
in the same way that they used to.
drop?
And international financial institutions, like the World Bank and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD, and EIB, they've announced they're not going to do any fossil fuels anymore. So who's going to finance this thing? On the back of what contract? So all this leads me to the conclusion that this is politicians talking, but that there's no there. This is a project that should not, probably will not happen because it's too complicated, too expensive, and too late in the arc of history.
Too late in the arc of history. So this is, the European Green Deal. They're not going to support this. We don't support fossil fuel projects anymore.
I am personally quite skeptical about the EastMed pipeline. Firstly, because it is a political project. And it's a political project that has as a rationale, indeed, the exclusion of Turkey. Then there's a second reason, which really is economic in nature. This is not an economically, in my view, viable project. I mean, the way in which energy markets have been developing, and particularly so, I would say, over the course of the pandemic, really make the building of a very expensive gas pipeline at a time in which we are talking about a Green Deal, energy transition, in a sense, sort of belong to an age that no longer exists.
An age that no longer exists.
I think that in the current post-COVID state, I would not put money on the project being completed. I think there's too much gas, and EastMed would have to compete with the Southern Corridor. The Trans-Adriatic pipeline TAP just came online as part of TANAP and the rest of the Southern Corridor. TurkStream is also online. Not to mention, there's now a proliferation of regasification facilities and floating liquefied natural gas facilities that are coming online all over Europe and including the Mediterranean. So there's enough already existing infrastructure. There's enough gas that's been developed. We don't need another pipeline like this necessarily.
Expensive project for a pipeline? Would that natural gas?
The EastMed pipeline, if you look at it on paper, is actually counter to
How many of those were actually
energy
moving?
trends that we're seeing today. That's because there's an increased push in the Western world to decarbonize the economy, decouple economic growth from hydrocarbons, and that includes natural gas. Especially when you consider who's the target customer, it's Europe. But Europe just passed the European Green Deal.
We will stay on course to become the first climate-neutral continent. The European Green Deal is a set of policy initiatives that promote efficient use of resources, with the aim of making Europe the first climate-neutral continent by 2050.
We know, for example, that our current fossil fuel economy has reached its limits. And we know that we have to move on to a new model, and this is why we set out to make the climate goal not only a political aspiration, but also a legal obligation.
So here you see shaping a secure and sustainable energy future for all. This is the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Green energy. We've moved on from carbon. That era has come to an end. So when I said earlier, where is all this going? What happens when the Charlie Beckner
thing about
goes
Turkey
away?
is that it's connected with so many of the biggest issues that the international community faces. Syria, Iraq, Israel, Russia, EU. And ultimately, the success of East Med will come about if Turkey is part of it. Because at the end of the day, it's not about natural gas. This is about regional power, cooperation, and we always have to remember that this is not just about natural gas molecules.
Okay, so I hope you can understand where all this is going is that, so now the U.S. has interfered with this, and it's going to affect the U.S. relationship with Israel, I think. It's elevating Turkey, which is what we've expected to happen in Bible prophecy all along. Even though Turkey's in horrible economic straits, it seems like Turkey keeps getting away with things. It's like, as Seth Fransman in the Jerusalem Post a couple weeks ago had a great article, and he goes like, yep, there goes Erdogan getting what he wants again, doesn't have any money, his support is failing at home, and he gets everything he wants. I'm going to suggest to you that there's a supernatural thing going on here in terms of Bible prophecy. And Turkey's very important, Ezekiel 38 and 39. I also think Daniel chapter 8 is about Turkey and Iran. Now, there's a question as to whether that's a future prophecy. I happen to think that it is. But you saw the things. Fossil fuel era is over. We have to change things. And then you saw, as they were talking about the Wall Street, they had the picture of the girl with the mask on the statue. And I'm going to suggest to you that what they're doing is, this is all part of the Great Reset and the great narrative that Davos has talked about. And all these people that you see, they're all part of Davos. I had a clip, I didn't put it in, about Trudeau. From 2017, Klaus Schwab came to the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. And he was sitting there having a talk, and he goes, we have this wonderful global leadership school, and all these great leaders have come through it, like Trudeau and France and Argentina. And he goes, in fact, when I meet the cabinet of Canada, I know over half the people in the cabinet of Canada that are running things. So don't think that this World Economic Forum thing just came out of nowhere. It actually came originally out of the Club of Rome and some other organizations. And now this is sort of where it's ended up in the World Economic Forum, the Great Reset and the Great Narrative. So now the Great Narrative is, well, you don't need carbon anymore. We're just going to change. And so my thinking is that when the narrative shifts, it's not going to be so much about Charlie Vector. It's going to be about green energy. And it's going to be an emergency. And we need to lock you down to prevent you from using too much carbon. And it's going to be part of the social credit system and the social credit score that they're going to give you as to how much you can participate in the economy. So it's all very connected. And you saw this last graphic here in this video where he talked about the different things that are tied together, Israel and Syria and Iraq and Russia and the EU and everything connected in this area. I do think this plays quite a bit into Bible prophecy. And here's an ancient map, and you'll see that Gomer, Togarmah, Meshach, and Tubal, that's Turkey. That's Turkey. You could even, I think some people say even Magog is partially part of Turkey as well. Turkey is very, very important in Bible prophecy. That's an ancient old map. The world is known to the Hebrews according to the Mosaic account. So this is very important that the United States interfered in this and said, stop it, because nobody's going to finance something it uses carbon, fossil fuels. We're getting away from that. Now that's a pipe dream in my view. They're not going to be able to do that. You saw those windmills there. Half of those windmills weren't even turning out there in the ocean. what happens if there's no wind? Or you live in Ohio where you don't have a lot of sun, or you get snow on your solar panels for a while. We saw what happened in Texas last year. That'll happen all over the world. But then that's what they got. Now they have their climate emergency, and they can institute their emergency control measures. At the heart of this, there are two podcasts I would recommend that you listen to. Frank Gaffney, midweek on Secure Freedom Radio, had a guy on named Abramowitz, a Jewish man. Don't think he's a believer, but he's raised in the Judeo tradition. And he said, listen, what's going on here is ultimately a spiritual battle that the leftists and Marxists, and I've talked about this by Michael Walsh's book on The Devil's Pleasure Palace, The Rise of Critical Theory. Highly recommend that you read it to understand how long this has been marching through the institutions. And ultimately what's going on is that this is a religion that they have. And it manifests itself in a number of ways, but it elevates man. And then you have these people come in like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, and they say, well, we're going to go to virtual reality, and you won't even need a job. And we'll have a universal basic income, and you can sit and play games if you want to. You don't have to work. We'll make sure you have enough to eat, and you can go play on your video games that we make money off of. But ultimately, it's a spiritual battle, because what are they doing? Man was created in the image of God. Now they are creating God in the image of their technology. And this is an epic spiritual thing. This is the Tower of Babel being repeated in our time. This is a major thing. So Mr. Abramowitz on Secure Freedom Radio today talked about this at length. And then a guy named, he was on Bannon's War Room yesterday, first hour. You can find the podcast on Rumble or warroom.org. Joe Poulos, I think is his name, Poulos, and he has a book coming out that's talking about, in fact, they're having a transhumanism conference up in Cleveland in a few weeks. Joe Allen, who also is a regular contributor at War Room, will talk about this transhumanist thing, and it is, I think Joe Allen has essentially come out and said, this is satanic, and it is a spiritual battle. And so what do you see happening? You see this, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual wickedness in high places. And it all sort of ties together. So let me just look at a couple. Here's Iran. So there's these negotiations going on with Iran. This is an article from The Spectator from a couple weeks ago. And what did they do yesterday? So they have Iran in a corner. The economy is failing. The people are upset. And the country may go. So what does Biden do yesterday is he lifts some of the sanctions on Iran. It makes no sense. They're like, you lunatics, what are you doing? And the word I heard, and I haven't had a chance to research it because it just happened, they may end up getting $29 billion out of this. That'll keep them afloat. And they're causing problems. And so they have this guy named Robert Malley, who's one of the main negotiators. Now, some of the people in the negotiating team in Vienna for the United States, they quit. 3 of them quit because they thought for lack of a better term, the Obama administration was acting like Neville Chamberlain did with Hitler back in the late 1930s, where he just sort of signed everything away. Remember, he came home and he held up that piece of paper and said, here is peace in our time. Well, how long did that last? But this is the model that we're following. The history is repeating itself. So here's the article from the Wall Street Journal. Differences splinter U.S. team negotiating with Iran on nuclear deal. So this Robert Malley guy is in charge, is one of the main negotiators for the United States. He used to work for a company called International Crisis Group. He was the CEO, and They specialize in appeasement. They try to settle everything. Someone who's been a trial lawyer for a long time, very few cases get tried anymore. They really don't, because everybody tries to get you to settle. So Malley is a guy who's settling, but here is their brochure from back in 2010 celebrating 15 years of International Crisis Group and featuring, well, let's talk about one of the great people on our board, our executive board from the beginning is who else? George Soros. There he is. That's the brochure. That's the national copy of the brochure. So here's what an article that was written back in 2021, October. Iran pushed to revive the nuclear deal, but prepare for worse outcomes. So here's what one article said. I read about this. Diplomatic sources have described Robert Malley, the U.S. Special Representative for Iran, who is leading the negotiations in Vienna, as the most dovish official we've ever seen. In fact, the former head, this is from the Spectator article, the former head of the International Crisis Group, a think tank devoted to dispute resolution, the very embodiment of the doctrine of softness, has bent over backwards so far that, as one official put it, he now speaks to Tehran from between his legs. The talks began with a spectacular American misstep. As soon as the starting gun was fired, U.S. negotiators amazed international partners by tabling a proposal that was so generous that the Iranians had to rub their eyes to believe it. In the minds of the Americans, this was a take-it-or-leave-it offer straight out of the box. But it didn't come away that way to Iran, because Iran doesn't negotiate this way. They see you make that offer and they think, oh, well, how much more can we get? They don't talk in terms of take it or leave it. It's how much are we going to get from you and wear you down and do this. So this is, so the other thing that's going on, so you see these attacks that are taking place in the United Arab Emirates. They're coming from the Houthis in Yemen. Drone attacks, missile attacks, those are all Iranian sponsored. As someone said in an article I read this morning, listen, the Houthis aren't making that stuff in Yemen. They're getting it from somewhere. And they know how to use it, and they may know how to assemble it, but they're not manufacturing this stuff. So as I've said, this whole issue with the drone technology and missile technology is upsetting the balance in the Middle East, and Tehran's using it. Here was a jihadist group that a couple years ago, last January, a year ago, tweeted this. It was one of the Righteous Promise Brigades from Iraq. They're a Iranian-backed Shiite militia. They published this. What do you see there? You see a drone flying into what? The Burj Al Khalifa, the tallest building on the planet. It's like over half a mile high, like twice the height of the World Trade Center, or close to it. I mean, and so what are they doing? They're doing a drone attack on that building. Iran and Russia. This is an article from the Jerusalem Post by Seth Frantzman. Iran-Russia ties are the new Middle East. Raisi went to Russia, I talked about that, to meet with Putin. He said these are important talks. Russia is calling on the U.S. not to supply weapons to Ukraine, and Turkey is offering to host Russia-Ukraine talks. This means that the Iranian leader's visit is a part of a larger Russian policy that stretches from Europe to the Middle East. Tehran sees Moscow as a key partner along with Beijing in its quest for more power. The visit may become a turning point in political, economic, and trade relations between Iran and Russia, and it may also be effective in ensuring security, economic, and trade relations in the region. So do you see the alliances forming that we've talked about in Bible prophecy for years? But now they're really, they're chiseling them out of stone. They're not setting them in, they're not pouring the concrete. They're chiseling them out of stone at this point. So here is, this is Raisi getting in Russia. We had this kind of strange meeting that he had with, in the age of Omicron, things were sort of ultra socially distanced. What is that, about a 20-foot table? Hey, how you doing down there? And here's another angle of it. Looks even worse from this angle. And so even the Wall Street Journal had a big editorial the other day. Why are Russia and China building up Iran? They had joint naval exercises in the South Pacific, Russia, China, and Iran. Why is this happening? Well, it's happening because I think it was prophesied that it's going to happen. Here is a village in Lebanon, Syria, and who do you see there? You see Ayatollah Khomeini, Bashar Assad, and Nasrallah and the Hezbollah flag. So here's a report from INSS that said, listen, we need to, stopping Iranian entrenchment in Syria, time to lower expectations. So the Israeli defense policy is, we're going to stop this. We're going to bomb here, bomb there, shoot a missile here, take out this guy, do this. And so this security expert writing for Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv, associated with Tel Aviv University, says we need to probably lower expectations as to what we're going to be able to do. Israel is facing a very complicated situation. It really is. Here's what this article says in its Israeli intelligence figures have presented optimistic assessments about stopping Iranian entrenchment in Syria and the ability to drive a wedge between Bashar al-Assad and Tehran. However, Israel is still far from achieving a strategic objective, driving Iranian forces and proxies out of Syria and restricting Iran's influence in the country. And the expectation that Assad and Russia will do the work for it is mistaken. Assad does not have the power to force Iran to leave Syria, and there is no other entity that can earn the loyalty that Tehran has bought with blood and treasure. Therefore, Israel must persevere with its ongoing campaign against the military entrenchment of Iran and its proxies in Syria, while seeking cooperation with local groups opposed to Iranian influence in the Assad regime. It's a short way of saying is, look, what Iran has done is, Iran doesn't really send many troops to Syria. They come in through social services and local groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and also over in Syria, and local jihadi groups. And so Israel kind of needs to do the same thing. And Israel's done a great job on that. They've done that. That's how they got into things in Tehran. But what this article says is this picture is more complex than the Israeli military has described. Iran's military and civilian entrenchment in Syria continues, albeit adjusting to changing circumstances and with more limited scope than was originally intended. And this is what Soleimani intended to do. There's always these things that come up every month or so now. Well, they're losing their charm in Syria. And this article says, no, that's not true. Assessments of a rift in relations between Iran and Assad are exaggerated and have two critical holes. First, it is hard to believe that Assad is ready to give up a secure strategic partnership of 40 years standing between Syria and Iran for the sake of potential benefits in the form of improved relations with the Gulf states that supported rebel groups that almost toppled his regime. And second, Iranian military advisors and Shiite militias still play a critical role in protecting the regime as the country's war is far from over. That's exactly right. So don't expect this to change anytime soon. The idea that it's possible to drive a wedge between Tehran and Assad and persuade him to remove the forces operated by Iran from his country is optimistic and unrealistic. So in other words, look, we know this is coming in Bible prophecy. We know that this is going to happen, and it's a very, very difficult thing to deal with. Let's see. Well, so here's another article from the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security saying Iran's drones tipped the balance of power in the Middle East. I talked about that quite a bit. So let me just talk real quickly about Ukraine and Russia and what's going on there and what it means, and is this going to be solved? This is a great map in this morning's Washington Post about the difficulties that Russia would have in invading Ukraine. They are estimated to have about 70% of the troops that they need. They have over 100,000 troops massed on the border. They want to take over Kiev. Well, the quickest route to Kiev is from the north, geographically, but it's also geographically impossible because there's marshes up there in Belarus, and they're not going to be frozen over forever. And then you have to go, the quickest route is through the Chernobyl, remember the nuclear plant that melted down? When was that? 40 some years ago, I think, now? 1981? Well, I don't remember. It was a good while ago, and it's still an exclusion zone. It's still ghost towns there. So they can't really go through there because of the radioactivity, so they're going to have to come in through these other places. Now so they've taken over the Crimean Peninsula back there in 2014. And I think I told you that there's a kind of a spiritual thing that's tied into this. I had goodness gracious. Well, at least I have my midweek one ready this week. I don't have to prepare it. I spent about 10 hours the other day trying to get a midweek done, and it's been all day, and now I have too much for today again. So anyway, so Russia took over Crimea back in 2014. Before they took that over, remember I told you that Putin had taken an icon, the Lady of Kazan, K-A-Z-A-N, Madonna and child icon, the most important icon in the Russian Orthodox Church, and flown it around the Crimean Peninsula. He had gotten that back from the Roman Catholic Church. And if you look, there was a meeting he had with John Paul II in the Vatican in 2003, and the icon sat right between them. John Paul wanted to take it to kind of heal the rift between the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church, but he got too ill, so he sent Cardinal McCarrick to take it back in 2004 and present it to the Russians. And this is a very important icon. So and this also plays into the Ukrainian thing, because Ukraine has its own Orthodox Church. Russia wants to, and Russia doesn't think that that's a legitimate church. So even though Putin's not very religious, the Russian Orthodox Church is very nationalistic, so he thinks that should be what's followed in Ukraine. So there are Russian-speaking areas. There's, it's called Luhansk and Donbass on the east. They're ethnic Russian. There's some talk, there was actually a bill introduced in the Russian parliament the other day to declare them separate nations so that Putin could go in and take them over. It's pending before the Russian legislature right now. They're talking about it. And if that happens, he could say, well, they're independent countries and they've asked me to come and help them. And so that way he gets away with saying, well, I didn't invade. I'm on a social visit with these, my troops are here on a social visit with these breakaway countries, independent countries. Now, part of that, though, will undermine, there's always a downside in geopolitics, because if he takes those countries are part of Ukraine right now, and they vote pro-Russian people into the Ukrainian government, which undermines the Ukrainian government, so Putin would lose that little bit of leverage. It's all very complicated. So then on top of that, this week, you had this meeting taking place. This is an article from a couple weeks ago in the Financial Times of London, January 22nd, 2022, the demand for a new global order. Now, it's always interesting when these secular papers and articles use the language that we use in Bible prophecy a lot. New global order, new world order. And so Putin and Xi had a teleconference back in January. And then this week they got together in Beijing on the opening day of the Olympics and had a big meeting. They were against Russia or against the United States. And they came out with a couple important things. They came out with a statement. And it's interesting, in that statement, it was like 6,000 words, so it was pretty wordy. It never mentioned Ukraine by name. But China said they would support Russia and vice versa. And Russia said, yes, we believe, in the meeting they said, yep, Taiwan is historically part of China. So what does that mean is going to happen is I think that means that if an invasion takes place, they expect that they're going to be sanctioned. So they've entered into a big gas and oil deal to supply gas and oil to China. And they're also going to be bringing Iranian oil and gas into that. And Iran controls, with Qatar, the largest natural gas field on planet Earth, the Pars field in the Persian Gulf. So some people think they'll attack after the Olympics. They're not going to do anything to spoil Xi's international coronation party. Here's a copy of the first page of the legislation introduced in the Russian Duma to declare these as separate states. And then some think that if the United States can't have two wars at the same time, Biden came out today and said our troops aren't going into Ukraine at all. He sent 3,000 to Europe, but we're not going into Ukraine. Some of the European countries are selling decommissioned artillery and military equipment. In other words, used stuff to Ukraine. But some think, well, if we're tied up in Ukraine, then China's going to make a move on Taiwan. They've already taken over Hong Kong in violation of treaties. What do you think they're going to do? There was also a report today that at the same time that this is happening, that the UK has resumed arming Turkey, even though there's all these human rights violations going on in Syria, and there's talk that a Turkish invasion of Syria, ostensibly to get rid of the Kurdish problem, or deal with what they call the Kurdish problem, is imminent. It could happen anytime. And then we also had this ISIS guy that was killed this week. So there's a lot going on geopolitically. And I think I've reached the limit of all of our wanting to sit here. So I will put something up this week, I promise. Pam, you're going to have to shovel the drive the next time. Thank you. Everybody out there thanks you for your sacrifice. This is kind of interesting. So the president of, just a couple more things. So the president of Israel, Herzog, went to the United Arab Emirates this week. While he was there, the Houthis shot a drone. They then shot, he was in there, it was intercepted by the United Arab Emirates. I think they used a Patriot missile battery or an Iron Dome battery to shoot it down. But it happened while he was there. It was to send a message. And then after that, Iraqi militias sent drones from Iraq down towards Dubai as well. So this drone thing is very difficult. One of the Houthi commanders came out and said, listen, we're planning a big blow on the United Arab Emirates. You think you're wealthy and you got all those big buildings and resorts and fancy hotels, and you have these expos, and you're even building the Abrahamic House of Faith, with a synagogue, mosque, and everything that's supposed to open this year. We're going to send thousands of missiles and drones in one attack on you guys. So we'll see how that goes. I mean, I hope it doesn't happen, but it will show what they can do and how disruptive they can be. And so this is the way the Iranians are negotiating in Vienna. Danny Gantz also went to the United Arab Emirates or to Bahrain. And really in a first, he flew over, official flyover by an Israeli government official over Saudi Arabia. And there's a lot of talk in the background that Saudi Arabia is going to come into the Abraham Accords when King Salman passes on. They will not do it while he's alive, but he may not last forever. So Gantz went to Bahrain, signed a defense pact with them. So I will talk about this in either a midweek or a separate presentation. But one of the things that's characteristic of the end times is this hatred of the Jews in Israel. And Amnesty International came out with this report this week called Israel's Apartheid Against Palestinians. It's very interesting when you analyze it. It's just a screed. It is total left wing. There were a group of progressive Congress people that came out and said, yes, Israel needs to, well, I don't know exactly what they said in their letter. They issued a statement. Let's see here. I had a copy of it. Progressives tell Congress to nix. So they come out and they said, yeah, Israel's got a problem. You should get rid of the Abraham Accords too. Because we don't like it because, and they said, underside grassroots and advocacy organizations call on members of Congress to embrace a U.S. foreign policy toward Palestine/Israel. They don't mean that. They don't care if Israel exists. That is rooted in human rights. While masquerading as peace and diplomacy, the Abraham Accords and this legislation are in fact an endorsement of arms sales and political favors between the U.S. and authoritarian regimes. This dangerous approach to foreign policy in the Middle East harms the most vulnerable communities already subject to systematic. See how they take the language that they use about vulnerable communities here in the U.S. and they just sort of port it around the world when it's convenient for them. And here's some of the organizations that signed on to this. You look down there, you see, who supports this? Oh, the Council on American Islamic Relations. We have Congress people who belong to that group. Linda Sarsour's group is on there. I can't remember what hers is. Jewish Voice for Peace, Action. It's a big left-wing organization. So this report from the, what was the organization that I said? Amnesty International. They redefined apartheid. They're saying, well, the definition of apartheid is this, but we're just going to redefine it a little bit so it applies to Israel. And essentially what they're doing is they're calling for the dismantling of the Jewish state. If you want a great article, 3 great articles on it. Caroline Glick, CarolineGlick.com. Melanie Phillips at Substack. Just Google Melanie Phillips Substack and you can get her article on this. And then probably the best article I saw was CAMERA, C-A-M-E-R-A, CAMERA.org, Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting, CAMERA. Dexter Van Zyl and some others are associated with that, and just a great organization, really does a good job on reporting on the Middle East. So look, we live at a very interesting time. There's a rise of this anti-Israel settlement, which I think is prophetic. There's an alignment of nations that I think is prophetic. There is an overarching narrative about to take control of the world economy. That's prophetic. And there is a spiritual battle going on behind the scenes in this. This is spiritual battle in high places. It is behind the scenes. We know from reading Daniel chapter 10, there's a prince, a demonic power behind Persia, Iran. I think we're seeing that manifest itself. So look, it's the acceleration, the convergence The logistics are coming into place, and hopefully we'll be people who'll be able to understand what's going on. So, great time to be alive. At the first coming of Christ, he said, listen, the prophets long to live in the day that you live in. We should be glad that we live in the day that we live in. As tough as it is, God is in control. Keep your foundations, put on the whole armor of God, share the gospel, and God has this. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your word. Pray that you'll bless us this week. Give us opportunities to share the gospel and help us to have the courage to stand for our faith in increasingly difficult times. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.